My name is Dr. John Skrzypaszek. I'm the director of the Ellen G. White Research Center at Avondale College of Advanced Education. I want to share with you a fascinating story. God's patience with people and the emergence of Health Message in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's a fascinating story, but a lot of people misunderstand the emphasis. Let me go to the beginning of the experience. Ellen White was visiting a place called Otsego in 1863. On Friday evening, visiting the home of the believers, she was encouraged or invited to open the Sabbath with a prayer. Her son Willie recalls the story, he was just a little boy, that his mother approached James White, her husband. She put her hand on his shoulder and she began to pray. It's during this time, during this prayer, which she offered for her husband, that she was taken in a vision, a 45-minute vision, known as the Otsego Health Message. It's quite fascinating. The question that I've raised is it just a coincidence that she received that vision on Friday evening during the opening of the Sabbath? Or was God more intentional? As I've looked at the background of what's happening in this story, it's quite fascinating. Well, we need to understand that God works with His people gently. He leads them slowly. Let me retract and go to the beginning of Ellen White's story. She is called by God in December of 1844 for a specific purpose. At that time, as a Methodist, from her Methodist background, she still kept Sunday as a day of worship. It's not till the later part of 1846, after she married James White, that they started the pamphlet by Joseph Bates, and they started the Bible, and they became convinced about Sabbath. As the time moved on, another few years elapsed, and we come to the time of 1863. Why is it that a health message is so relevant at that time? What was happening in their personal lives and in the life of the church? Well, from about 1857, Ellen White began to address some issues in the church. A lack of spirituality, lack of dependence on God. That in 1860, we have adopted the name Seventh-day Adventists. Is it possible to think that people were not living up to the name? They were not reflecting the identity of what it means to have faith in God, to be a believer in the creation story and the believer in the Advent, to be on the journey. Have they lost something there? Well, interestingly, that message that came to her on Sabbath had also personal application. You see, until that time, Ellen White was still eating pork. There was need for our church to become healthy, but not only in a physical sense, but in a spiritual sense. And I would like to suggest to you that that message that was given to her on Sabbath during the opening of the Sabbath hours, the time when people welcomed the presence of God, was very significant, because later on Ellen White said something very significant about Sabbath. Sabbath provides a week by week spiritual renewal. Did she and her husband need a spiritual renewal and revival? Yes, they did. Because a few days after receiving that message, she wrote in a manuscript something very significant, that health message had a personal application in her life and in the life of her husband. As the story continues, as the research suggests, her husband at the time struggled with depression, struggled with the sense of being able to forgive people for the hurt that they've created. You see, there was a need for spiritual revival and perception what it means to have the heart of God and to see things as God sees them. Ellen White herself said, "We have found very difficult to understand each other at that time, to be sensitive to each other's needs." There was a relational need to understand what it means to have a conviction that God is present in our life. So, during that vision, Ellen White was told in a clear manner that, for example, pork is not healthy. It had a personal challenge to her life. In fact, when she was approached sometime before that by Pastor Haskell about the significance of the biblical teaching that pork was not healthy, she said at that time, I'm not sure whether it's relevant. God didn't reveal that to me at that moment. If it will be relevant to us, yeah, time will come that he will reveal that. And so he did. But at that time she said to Pastor Haskell, "You make too much of it." It's quite fascinating as I look at that story that God leads his people gently and slowly. He leads them to the point where they're willing to make a decision because they are ready for a change. This health message given to Ellen White in Otsego is significant because of two elements. First of all, it challenged the church to focus on spiritual nutrition. And secondly, it challenged the church to accept a holistic approach to lifestyle. Temperance in everything. Temperance in what we eat, temperance in what we drink, and temperance even in work. At that time, people were overworked. There was unbalanced in their life. The health message given to the church provide a holistic approach to life. But on the top, the most important priority is the spiritual emphasis, connection with God. Why am I saying that? And why am I stressing that? Quite simple. You see, you can eat the best things, you can drink the best things, and yes, you can improve the quality of your health. You can even prolong your life. Research suggests that Adventists who live a temperate life live longer. They prolong their life. But friends, what we eat, what we drink, will not change our heart. We need a spiritual nutrition. Do you know that Hitler was a vegetarian? It's well documented. And yet it didn't change his heart, his attitude to life and people. You know the story. And I suggest to you that as we look at those stories, we can discern God's movements not only in people's personal lives, but in history. What do I mean by this? Well, let me take you a step further. In 1863, a time came where it was significant for God to empower the church with the vision of a holistic lifestyle. Do you know why? Because in 1872, we began to discover the importance of education, of expanding our mind, of preparing our life for service for God. Then in 1874, we began to develop a sense of mission to the world at large. We sent our first missionary to Europe, John Andrews. And so the story goes on. And you know, I'm fascinated by the fact that as I look at history, I can discern two things. The gentle presence of God's life in history, who leads people into His presence for a specific purpose. But more so, I'm discovering that as I look at history, I'm discerning God's movements in people's life. And that can be my personal experience and your experience today.